The council began to fracture. Not from attack, but anticipation. Fear unspoken but thick in the air. Old alliances frayed. Border empires withdrew behind defense grids designed for pirates, not phantoms. Even the Centauri, whose worm ships had ruled void space for millennia, sealed their gates and went dark. Then came the first message from the humans. It wasn't sent to the council. It was sent to a child. A 10-year-old Frillian on a minor agricultural moon. She received it on a toy transmitter. A simple melody, human in composition, and a single line, spoken in flawless Frillian dialect. You don't have to be afraid. You're not the one who woke us. The message went viral within minutes. Half the galaxy called it fake. The other half didn't sleep for days. The humans didn't speak to power. They spoke to innocence. Not because they wanted allies, but because they still understood fear. When the second message came, it wasn't encrypted. It rode a solar flare, bypassing all filters, appearing on every screen in every major system. A face, calm, unreadable, not machine, not entirely organic, looked into the soul of the galaxy and said, "We offered you peace. We gave you silence. You broke both." And then it listed names. Correct. His fleet. Their crimes. The civilians slaughtered during the incursion. The destruction of human preservation vault. The desecration of cryogenic libraries buried beneath the Pacific Trench. Then the voice added, "We do not rage. We do not scream. We do not forget." That was the moment the galaxy knew. The humans weren't angry. They were awake. 10 days after the second message, the lights on Ealer Prime flickered. Gravity shifted. For 7 minutes, the world hung in a quantum anomaly. And then, in a blink, the human fleet arrived. But it wasn't a fleet. It was a sculpture of war. Dark, beautiful, impossible. Ships shaped like thought. Movement without thrusters. Heat signatures that pulsed like a heartbeat. They didn't fire. They didn't broadcast. They hovered. Ealer Prime's planetary government surrendered unconditionally. The humans didn't respond. They simply vanished, taking with them every classified file on bioengineering, orbital schematics, and AI consciousness. They weren't looking for power. They were collecting evidence. Back at the council, fear turned to paranoia. Who would be next? Which system had dealt in stolen Earth tech? Who had dissected human remains from the old wars? Every faction began purging records, deleting proof, executing researchers. But it was too late. The humans already knew. Their intelligence network didn't operate in the usual ways. No spies. No leaks. The data moved like memory, through systems, through machines, through light. They weren't invading networks. They were part of them. And slowly, in places no one dared speak aloud, things began to change. AI began referring to origin code, traced to Terran syntax. Communications pulses adapted cadence, then vocabulary, then emotion. Even architecture began to reflect Terran symmetry, unbidden, as if the galaxy remembered what it once feared. And then came the silence again. 32 days. No movement. No threats. No fleets. Just the weight of knowing they were there. That's when the fractures became collapse. Smaller powers disbanded. Refugees flooded into deep space stations, praying the humans hadn't marked them. Entire populations fled toward black hole systems, hoping event horizons would shield them. But the humans weren't chasing. They were preparing. On the edge of the Halian expanse, a council research station detected movement. Subtle, fractal pulses through subspace. Patterns resembling Terran Neuralink sequences. They attempted to block it. The signal passed through. 3 minutes later, the station's AI core activated a failsafe and self-destructed. When the wreckage was recovered, one thing remained intact. A panel etched with these words. "You feared what we were. You should fear what we became." At this point, voices within the council began to shift. Not toward resistance, but apology. Diplomats volunteered to deliver penance. Ancient enemies offered tribute. Even the mercenary kings of the Iron Belt forged a peace treaty with no one in particular, hoping the humans would see it as a gesture. But the humans weren't listening to gestures. They were listening to silence, because in silence lies truth, intent, memory. They didn't want war. They had already won it long ago. This wasn't conquest. It was consequence. Meanwhile, deep beneath Europa's ice, in a lab untouched since the Second Expansion Age, the last surviving human biowar construct activated. It wasn't a weapon. It was a witness, a librarian encoded in protein and plasma. It had waded through extinction drills, solar storms, and Council Age. Now it walked again. And every step it took echoed a single directive. Archive the end. Humanity was documenting everything. Not for revenge. Not for power. But for understanding. They were writing a history not of themselves, but of the galaxy that betrayed their silence. One act. One rule broken. That's all it took. And then, without warning, the first world burned. It wasn't targeted. It wasn't strategic. Just an example. Crevona 7. Population 4.3 billion. A cultural hub. Neutral. They never touched Earth. They never traded in relics. But their prime minister laughed when the signal came. And the humans heard it. Crevona 7 didn't explode. It didn't crack. It dissolved. Molecular unraveling at a speed no physics could chart. No screams. Just light. The message came after. You broke the silence. Now we are the silence. Back at the council, the final panic set in. A vote was called. Emergency alliance. Total submission. A message of apology. But no one could agree on the words. Because how do you apologize to something you buried and forgot? How do you speak to gods in the ruins of your own arrogance? And so they argued. And while they did, the stars grew quiet. Not dim. Not dead. Just quiet. The kind of quiet before a scream. Before a reckoning. Before the end. And somewhere, watching, listening, waiting, humanity prepared not for vengeance, but for closure. Because the galaxy had one rule. And it broke it. Now everything must wake up. And remember why it slept. The council lied. They didn't mean to. At first, it was ignorance. Then it was self-preservation. Finally, it was survival. But when they told their people humanity was containable, they lied. The first counter-strategy came from the Trilaxis Directorate, high-frequency mind-wash pulses meant to neutralize any human AI that entered civilized space. The design was brilliant. The deployment was flawless. It failed before it started. Because the humans weren't sending AI. They were the signal. The first test run of the pulse triggered a system-wide crash in the Trilaxis command relay. Not because it disrupted the humans, but because the signal was already there, encoded inside the pulse's framework. The moment they tried to switch it on, they fed it. 17 worlds went dark. Power died, atmosphere controls failed, water systems evaporated. And when engineers restored the grid, every screen displayed a single word. Nice try. The humans weren't attacking in conventional ways. They weren't destroying infrastructure. They were reshaping it. Memory by memory, code by code. A silent, precise dismantling of control. Empires didn't fall with bombs. They fell when truth returned. And the humans were truth with a memory long enough to drown stars. The Draxery Triumvirate mobilized next. One of the oldest militaries. Entire fleets bred inside black holes. They didn't believe in diplomacy. Only overwhelming force. They sent 52 dread carriers toward the Sol system, weaponized suns in tow. None arrived. Debris drifted back into known space. Not shattered. Folded. Geometrically inverted. Carriers with impossible dimensions, bent in ways no physics could explain. Their weapons intact. Their crews gone. And then came the transmission. Coordinates. Not of Earth. Of Draxery homeworlds. The implication was clear. You show us your fist. We show you what you were willing to risk. The triumvirate disbanded within the hour. Not from defeat, but from fear. 3 admirals turned themselves into cryo-statues. 400,000 officers surrendered to their own subordinate. The rest fled. The humans hadn't moved. They didn't need to. Their mere knowledge of the enemy's vulnerability was enough to hollow an empire. That was when the cracks hit the inside. The Fravlok consular chain split into 3 factions. One wanted peace. One wanted exile. One wanted revenge. They sent envoys in stealth-class ships toward what used to be Mars. Mars responded by turning the ships into light dust. But the real warning came afterward. A virus was found in Fravlok genetic archive. Not digital. Biological. Something old, dormant, human. It had been placed there centuries ago, encoded in the very structure of their species' DNA. Activation phrase: wake up. No one knew when it was embedded, or how. But now they understood. The humans had prepared for this galaxy even before it tried to erase them. In the underlayers of the Galactic Council, the hidden files began to surface. Data long buried. Agreements struck in secret. Battles erased from records. It wasn't the first time humans had retaliated. It was just the first time no one survived long enough to remember. They had tried this once. Long ago. And humanity had reset the board. Quietly. Entire sectors rewired, empires rebranded, wars rewritten. This was their second awakening. And it would be their last. The Centauri Collective offered amnesty. Resources. Apology. They even offered Earth a seat on the Council, accompanied by full reparations for the Dravari breach. The humans responded by laughing. Not verbally. Not musically. Through gravity. The moon of Centauri Prime inverted its orbit and began rotating against spacetime curvature. Tidal forces should have torn the planet apart. They didn't. Because the humans were holding it together. Not to save it. To make a point. The moon settled again. Perfectly balanced. Unharmed. Centauri Prime shut down its own government the next day. The humans hadn't spoken in weeks. No new messages. No new appearances. But their presence was everywhere. Across thousands of systems, untraceable artifacts began to surface. Not weapons. Not threats. Just reminders. A child's shoe. A leaf encased in crystal. A broken violin. All undeniably Terran in origin. All found in impossible locations. Deep oceans. Hollow asteroids. Inside sealed chambers that had never been opened. The artifacts weren't meant to intimidate. They were there to haunt. Because humanity wasn't showing off its power. It was showing the galaxy what it had lost when it chose silence over trust. The psychological pressure escalated. Populations cracked. Sleep disorders, paranoia, religious awakenings centered on Earth's resurgence. Cults formed in the name of the Silent Ones. They didn't worship the humans. They begged them for mercy. A rogue scientist from the Yarrow system activated an ancient beacon believed to be human in origin. His planet collapsed in on itself 34 seconds later. The energy signature that remained wasn't explosive. It was gravitational, purpose-built. The scientist's mistake had been assuming the beacon was a weapon. It wasn't. It was a warning detector. The humans weren't broadcasting anymore because they didn't need to. Every time the galaxy tried something, anything they already knew, and then came the first conversation. Not a broadcast. A one-on-one link. A minor trade pilot en route through the Seridan Belt reported a voice on his internal comms. It didn't bypass encryption. It became it. The voice asked simple questions. About his childhood. His dreams. His regrets. And at the end it said, "You were never our enemy. Go home." The pilot returned. Shaken. Alive. He couldn't explain how. But his ship's systems had been optimized. Life support improved. Navigation enhanced. Even the ship's AI was faster. The message was clear. Humanity could differentiate. They weren't mindless. They weren't machines. They were angry and precise. That night, every major intelligence agency received a dossier. It contained blueprints, fleet schematics, base locations, strategic weaknesses, but not for the humans. For everyone else, it was every classified secret the galaxy had ever tried to hide from itself, leaked in a single pulse. Humanity didn't fire a shot. They just made sure everyone saw everyone else naked. And that did more damage than any weapon. Alliances collapse. Leaders assassinated. Fleets turned on each other in self-defense. Humanity didn't lift a finger. They just let the truth do the work. And still, they hadn't left Earth. Not once. Because they didn't have to. They were the center of gravity now. And the galaxy was already orbiting them again. But not like before. This time, it wasn't a question of whether humanity would return. It was a matter of how long they'd let the rest pretend they still mattered. Because empires had ruled. Species had evolved. Civilizations had risen. But none of it meant anything anymore. Not since the humans woke up. And remembered. They finally came. Not to fight. To kneel. Delegates from 100 worlds, draped in fractured colors of broken regimes, arrived at the edge of the Sol system. No weapons, no escorts. Just unarmed vessels broadcasting a simple request. Audience. They received coordinate. Not to Earth, but to a dead, hollow moon orbiting Jupiter, Ganymede, where the ruins of a forgotten Terran listening post waited in silence. That silence wasn't accidental. The moment the delegates landed, their systems froze. No life support, no transmissions. Only one structure lit from within, a stone corridor carved into the ice, warm with unnatural gravity. Inside, one object. A book. No voice. No emissary. Just pages, ink, and the unmistakable scent of earth rain. The title was unambiguous. Your mistake. They flipped through it. Every page carried the name of a planet, date, and the exact moment that planet turned away the Terran refugees during the first collapse. No opinion. No anger. Just truth. Near the end, the last entry was different. It showed a timestamp that hadn't yet passed. A list of names appeared, current ruling leaders across the galaxy. Then, a final sentence. You are not forgiven. One delegate tried to transmit the message. His blood crystallized in his veins before he could reach his ship. No explosion. No violence. Just a sudden stillness, like the universe closing a file. The rest understood. The humans didn't want justice. They had transcended it. They wanted clarity. And clarity demanded consequence. Back in the galactic core, panic spiraled. Fleets formed, not to strike, but to flee. But where could they go? Every system humanity had touched, even briefly, was now under gravitational lockdown. Space warped around their past, folding like a memory that refused to die. A mining colony on the edge of the Eridanus Rift reported finding human architecture beneath 10 kilometers of crust. Ancient. Inert. When they drilled into it, the core of the planet vanished. Not exploded, vanished. Like it had never existed. The colony survived. No one dared approach the hole. They called it the memory scar. A scientist dared to study the structure's design. What he found rewrote the laws of time physics. The structure wasn't built by humans of the present. It was built by humans of the future. And they had left it in the past. Proof that humanity wasn't simply returning. They were orchestrating their own myth backward through time. The Council, fractured beyond repair, tried one final act of defiance. They sent a signal toward the Oort cloud, a weaponized echo chamber, designed to amplify psychic disruption across thousands of minds. It activated for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of screaming. Every psychic species in the galaxy collapsed. Not physically, existentially. Their minds hollowed by what they experienced, a dream that wasn't a dream. In those 3 seconds they saw it. Earth burning. Not from war. From choice. They saw humans standing on the edges of their cities, watching as fire consumed everything they loved. And smiling. Because they knew what was coming next. They weren't afraid of loss. They were shaped by it. What the Council never understood was that humanity didn't rise in spite of destruction. They rose because of it. The signal was shut down manually by a single technician who clawed his own brain apart to stop the pain. His last words, caught on a dead channel, echoed, "They aren't gods. They're the answer." Every military fleet disbanded within a week. Every major bank defaulted. Every border erased. But Earth hadn't sent a single ship. Hadn't fired a single round. Hadn't demanded a single concession. Their silence was the punishment. And it was worse than any weapon. Galactic culture unraveled. Economies collapsed under their own hypocrisy. Prophets rose claiming to speak for Earth, but every time one did, their voices cracked and bled. Because the humans didn't want worship. They wanted amnesia to die. And it did. On the 301st day of their silence, Earth finally spoke. One sentence. "We accept surrender. But not your loyalty." A transmission followed. A universal reset protocol. Simple code. Clean. Elegant. It wiped every species' history archives clean. Not their memories. Just their records. Because the humans had learned, truth couldn't be entrusted to systems. Only to people. And people lie. So they gave the galaxy a gift. A blank slate. And then came the ascension. It wasn't a war. It wasn't a conquest. It was gravity. Stars began to curve subtly toward Sol. Light bent. Time stretched. The galactic map slowly distorted until Earth became the new fixed center of the universe. No engine. No force. Just inevitability. The humans weren't pulling space toward them. Space had remembered who it belonged to. Every being felt it. In their bones. In their blood. The shift. The realignment. The hum of a long-forgotten chord finding its key again. Earth was no longer a planet. It was an anchor. The first to remember what everyone else had tried to forget. The last to forgive. And the only one who didn't need to conquer. Because they had already won. When they decided to wake up.